Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Truths We Hide podcast. Today's guest is Jennifer Pasquale. She is the founder of Pride and Grit. Jen is a 13-year military spouse and former corporate professional turned volunteer and military spouse advocate. She has created Pride and Grit as a place for connection and conversation among military spouses about the challenges of military life. Over the years, Jen has watched seasoned military spouses struggle silently, believing that supporting their service member meant sacrificing their authenticity. Through telling the stories of military spouses who are struggling but still thriving, Jen hopes to inspire others to carve their own paths and rediscover their voice. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being on here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. I've been following Pride and Grit for a while, and I really enjoy what you do and what it stands for. So why don't you tell everybody what you do?
Well, again, my name is Jennifer Pasquale, and I am going on now 14-year military spouse, about 16 years sort of in military life. And about 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, I launched Pride and Grit as a resource for military spouses, just to try to help create a space for conversation around some of the things that are, I think, most challenging about military life, and really just creating the space for some honesty and being able to talk about those things. What I had started to observe in kind of my peers was a lot of folks were, maybe hitting some valleys in their military life and didn't really know where to go and how to talk about those. And so I was just hoping to kind of tell some stories and create some conversation that would help people feel like there was a safe place for all that.
That's great. I think there needs to be more platforms like that because I don't think that a lot of us feel like there's a safe space to talk about that military background. There's no one can understand what we go through, and so we just keep it to ourselves. So, how do you feel within the past 2 years? Where has it taken you, or what has it taken to hold Pride and Grit?
Yeah, it's been such an interesting journey because it, like everything else, it, isn't, in some ways it's exactly what I thought. And in many ways, it's very much not what I thought. I started out because I felt like there were a few stories of my own that I really wanted to get out there, challenges that I had been through, and felt like talking about those for me had been important. And I felt like maybe I wasn't the only person who would also benefit from kind of telling some of their own truths. And so kind of once I got past that point, it's like, okay, those stories are out there, now what? And then it was sort of looking around and talking to peers. And what I started, I think the most important evolution has been really seeing this need among what I consider kind of the sort of senior spouse category, or just folks who are kind of on that tenure track, if you will, the career track, but they're past that point of decision. They're at the 10-year mark or the 12-year mark or the 14-year mark in military life, and they're in it for the long haul. So there's sort of no turning back now, right? And I think for that particular audience, what I'm starting to really see is just this need to have a way to kind of talk openly about the things that are challenging. And I think a lot of times folks feel like, oh, well, if I say what's hard, then maybe I'm not being a positive person, or I'm not being a good, role model to others, or, kind of, you name any kind of, expectation that we're putting on ourselves unnecessarily. And just really hoping that I can help people see that, no, actually, the strength comes from the honesty, and the strength comes from the conversation, and from saying, oh, you know what, I'm actually not doing that great in these particular areas. But these are the resources that I know that can help me, or these are the things that I've done to try to get me out of that valley. Because we're not going to all hit them at the same time. But I mean, that's just life, right? There's always going to be valleys. And when we hide them, I think sometimes we rob ourselves of the ability to have the support that we need, but we also kind of rob others the ability to see us weather it and see us come out the other side stronger, and better for whatever that valley might have been.
Right. No, that is very it's such a great thing to have that tribe because we forget about it. We're so just focused on how we going to make it when there's other people out there. If you just, just you got to be the first one to go, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. And then we all come in and go, wait, no, you can do it. I
Oh,
promise you.
trust me. Like my husband can attest to the fact that many a times we've sat across, each other at dinner, and I've been like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I don't, I think some days I am forgiving of that, and some days I'm not. Some days my expectations of myself are high, and some days I understand that this is a process, and I feel like it just will kind of reveal itself, if you will, and it will evolve as it needs to based on what the audience needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think right now I'm in kind of this transition of trying to figure out what that looks like, and what is the long-term need for the community that I've kind of started to focus more heavily on. I think when I first started, it was really broad, and not that there's not content, I think, for everyone, but initially I think it was very broad and not particularly focused on kind of the older spouse. But what I've started to learn is that seems to be the audience that I can speak to, because that's my story, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to tell a story, when you're kind of all in the same foxhole. So we'll see where it goes, but it's fun.
No,
It is that. So that's always a big part, right?
no, that is good because we do need to. I think for us, I guess older spouses that have been in for a little bit, I love being able to take somebody under my wing and say, "No, I used to be there. That was so me. I was lost. I was confused. I didn't know what to do." And just now, I think I'm glad that I went through all that so that I can help somebody else because I didn't have that,
Right.
20 years ago. I was just like, "Oh, I guess I'll just wing it or I'll just watch her." Or but it's hard because there are some expectations of you having to know it all, especially I think once you get over the hump of 10 years, it's like, well, you should know. Well, no, I really don't because
No.
every unit is different. Every position they take on is different. Every crowd is different. It's just like you have to remember who you are and stay true to yourself because you'll get lost in that. I gotta be perfect all the time. No, you
Mm-hmm.
don't. Just be you.
Well, and I think this is an evolution that we're seeing that frankly makes me very excited, because I feel like, I certainly had mentors over the year, but I don't necessarily feel like I always knew what they were struggling with. And not that I
Hmm.
needed to be their person for that, but I
Hmm.
think by watching them always have it together and always feel like they, had the answers, I created that own expectation for myself when I was in their same position.
Hmm.
And so then when I got into that position and didn't have the answers and didn't, know what to do, I think it made it harder for me because I didn't know kind of who to turn to. And I didn't feel like
Hmm.
there was room and space for me to say, hey guys, I have no clue what I'm doing. And I think that's been like the freeing thing of this whole experience, is it's really taught me that there's so much value in just being able to be comfortable enough to say, I don't know. I
Hmm.
don't even necessarily need to know, but you and I can figure it out together. And I am happy to walk by you as we, get you what you need. And that's very different from kind of like the army I grew up in. It's not what I saw.
Hmm.
And I think to some extent you sort of, you don't always see what you or become what you see, but to some extent, right? If what you've always
Hmm.
seen is people who are put together, have all the answers, know what's going on all the time, it's just easy and kind of natural to think that that should be you.
Right.
But I think there's this whole evolution happening now where spouses are being a lot more honest. I think there's a lot more value being placed on kind of the authenticity of just saying, you know what, today's not a great day, but tomorrow will be fine, and being able
Yes.
to just put it out there, knowing it's not the end of the world, right? It's okay. And you'll be accepted for that, and you won't be judged for that. I think I like to think, and maybe it's my, maybe it's only me, but I like to think our sort of judgment is coming down a little bit, and we're starting to see the detriment that has had over the years. I think there was a
Right.
lot more judgment in the army that I started out in than there is now among the spouses.
Hmm.
I feel like there's just a lot more support and a lot more of people putting their arms around the person next to him and saying, how can I help you get where you need to be?
Yes. Thank God. I think I'm starting to see a little bit too, because I think I just got to the point where like, I need your help. I don't know. Is there an SOP for that? Where's that book? Where? And I've had friends are like, here, let me send you what I was given. And I'm like, oh God, thank you. Thank you so much. And then I'll pass that down, because
Right.
there's no way you can, it's just so much pressure and so much of the feeling of I've got to get this right, or the general's wife's going to look at me funny, and it's like, oh my gosh, but we're all human, they've been through it too,
Yeah.
so it's just, we just have to remember.
No, for sure.
Do you find that there's different, let's see, so your guys' background is Army?
Yep.
Okay. Do you feel that there's a different take in every branch? Have you surrounded yourself with Air Force and Navy and Marines? Have you had spouses come in and say, this is how we do it, or this is how I feel, or?
Yeah, a little bit, not as much as I would have liked, honestly. Like we've
Mm-hmm.
always been at kind of predominantly Army bases.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we're at a naval base or naval. It's a schoolhouse, so it's kind of a little bit different. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there are some kind of active duty Navy here. But because we're in a schoolhouse year, we're not like, I think a lot of people when they get to those academic years just kind of deck out.
Yes.
It kind of everybody takes a knee, like the family takes a knee, which is needed at this point.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a lot of opportunity to kind of interact with the Navy folks here to truly understand their experience. But we did have at our last duty station, we had an Air Force neighbor, or 2 duty stations ago, I guess. And so it was always interesting to hear her take when I would talk about things I was doing. This was when my husband was in a leadership position. So, she and I were kind of apples to apples in terms of what our spouses were doing. And it was just interesting because the way the Army would handle things and the, not even the expectations, but I was very involved and I enjoyed that. I was involved because I wanted to be. And she was involved as well, but there was a lot of infrastructure created, it seemed like, in the Air Force side for her to not have to do quite as much. There were, I don't know, just more mechanisms that helped get things done that the Army didn't have unless there were volunteers doing it. So it felt like there was a little bit of a difference, but I don't, like, specifically, I don't know that I really have a good sense of that yet.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, I've been mostly around Army, so I don't really know all the different branches do things, but I know that over the years I'm just so fortunate to have those spouses, be there and say, no, this is how you could do it. Don't, work smarter, not harder. It took a long time to get there, because you're always like, no, I have to do it this way. When there's really like a little shortcut that it can make it a little bit easier, and it just makes you breathe so much better.
Well, and I think that's absolutely true. And I do recall, like, she was such a great influence on me, because sometimes I would get kind of mired in the weeds of what I was trying to do, and some initiative we were doing or whatever the case might have been, and she's kind of like, why does it have to be X? Couldn't it be Y? And it was a great to have someone with a different perspective to make you kind of go, well, again, this is what I've seen, so this is what I'm doing. And so that's the beauty, is it's no matter what branch, but even just other people in general, just the ability to kind of work as a larger community, because we all grew up differently within our military, family experience. And so being able to see how other people do it, I think can really impact positively places where you may, be able to enhance the effort with, to your point, maybe not quite the same amount of work, right?
Right.
Work smarter, not harder.
So. No, you're right. And you have kids?
We do. We have 2.
That's wonderful. What are the ages?
So 10 and 12.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes. It is everything I thought it would be.
And that's why I say about a 17 and a 19-year-old. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know.
How has it been raising them in this environment? How do you think what is your take on raising children in this military lifestyle?
Yeah, it has been really fascinating to kind of watch them and watch their evolution through this, because they each have gone through similar phases at different points, right? They've each gone through kind of a, I hate the Army phase. And then they've each gone through a, wow, I'm really proud that we're part of this life phase, and
Mm-hmm.
I think they, like a lot of kids, tend to vacillate between those two camps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and to watch how they do that is interesting, and to watch how they support each other. I remember my son once, my daughter was she was in a, in an I hate the Army day, and he was the one to kind of build her up, and he was the one to support her, and I remember him saying to her, yeah, I used to feel that way too.
Aww.
So it was very sweet to see how they become, support for each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the reality is it's incredibly difficult for children. And I think particularly, it, I think that the age, if you will, of the Army family, and Army I can only speak to because that's, like my wheelhouse, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I think the age of the military family is changing, and I've certainly seen the age of the Army family changing. And so, 10 years ago, you had a, the number or the proportion of people married, and the proportion of service members married, not even 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, pre-conflict. And I like how the data to back this up, but I'm pretty sure the data's out there. It was younger, right? People were getting married younger because they were around. I mean, the big challenge with the conflicts that we've had is that people weren't here, and it's hard to meet, your spouse if you're not ever in the country. And so my husband and I got married late. We got married, in essentially our 30s. And now there's people getting married even later and having kids even later. And so I think that the interesting thing with raising kids is that, especially in the older population of military spouses, is now you're dealing with these intense leadership roles that come kind of towards that end of a career, but you're dealing with it with small children versus 20 years ago, you had high schoolers, and so it
Mm-hmm.
was a very different dynamic, for the stress that put on a family when you've got high schoolers versus when you've got toddlers. So I think that's been, I don't know, for me, it's been kind of an interesting thing to watch and to see what that looks like and how people, deal with those, with some of those stresses in the fishbowl, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think that's been kind of an interesting thing. But for our kids in general, I mean, I think it's hard, right? They've moved. I think my son's had four schools in 6 years, which is pretty typical.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll move on after 1 year here. We'll move on to another school, and and he'll continue. But yes, it makes them resilient. Yes, it makes them all the things. There's all the things they say, right? That it's
Right.
great for military kids. But I think when the rubber meets the road, what I often see is that there are definitely costs that are paid along the way, and it will change who they become. It doesn't make it worse. It doesn't make it better. It will change who they become because of what they've seen and what they've experienced, and who they had to become to be part of this life. So I find it just fascinating to watch that with them and see what that means for them down the road. As not growing up as a military kid, like I have no background for that. I wasn't a military kid. I didn't know what that meant. So I don't know. I don't know exactly
No.
how to answer that, I guess.
No, I understand. I wasn't a military child either. I stayed in the same in the same place from the age of 6 years old to 21. So same neighborhood, same friends, same all that. So I had no idea. And then now watching the kids when they're, from daycare up until they can actually realize, wait a minute, we have to move, but I just made friends. I'm
Mm-hmm.
tired of moving. And they would cry and they'd be upset and they'd be like, I just want to stay in one spot. And then you have to try to make it a positive thing. Well, we don't get to go to a new school and you never know what there might be different sports there. And so you're trying to hype it up for them, but they're lost and they had to grow up a lot faster than we had to in some cases. And
Mm-hmm.
it's heartbreaking. But yes, they're resilient. Yes, they're all the things, but they've had to go through some hardships to get there. And it breaks your heart sometimes, but you have to make it a positive experience. Otherwise, they're going to hate this life. and you don't want them to hate this life because you got so many more years to go, You're like, well, we got another
Well, and
20.
I think the other interesting thing, and I've seen this in our kids and in friends' kids, is just the idea that not every kid obviously is wired the same, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
no parent has multiple children that are the same children. They're all
Right.
different to raise. They all require a different kind of parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And some kids do really great in this life, and some kids do struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's also challenging when maybe you have one or two that seem to be pretty resilient and can bounce back pretty easily, and then you potentially have one that is struggling more. And sort of how do you manage that as a parent, and what do you give them to try to help lessen that a little bit. I think it's, to your point, I think there are some of the positivity things are, just sort of funny stories. I was thinking of one with my daughter recently where all of a sudden she decided she was going to map out her next room, and we're not moving for 6 months, but she had her schematic and she knew exactly where she wanted her bed in a room we don't even
Aw.
know what it looks like yet, right? We don't even have a house yet.
Yeah.
But she was ready to map out her room because she wanted to make sure she had a space for her favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this really sweet thing because I realized it was just this great reminder to me that, I think as parents and as military spouses have a hard time not sort of jumping to the next place and jumping into all the things that come with the next location. And our kids are no different, right? They have that same, anxiety is not maybe the right word, but like they have that same piece of them that is
Mm-hmm.
also thinking forward, that is also, considering what comes next. And she's doing it with anticipation and with pleasure and with, a fun activity, which was just nice to see. It wasn't her going, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to plan my next room. It was this fun thing, and she was looking forward to it. And so then it kind of lets okay, I'm not ruining them.
Right,
Right. Like
right.
they're going to be okay. Right. They are finding the same gems that we have to find that make it all, that make it all worth it. Being able to find those things that are good, because there are so many good things, and being able to focus on those and being able to have that be in the forefront. Not always easy, but, so important in terms of just keeping us, happy, frankly.
Right. No, that's brilliant, actually. I wish that I could just plan out my room instead of having to worry about where they're going to go to the doctor, where's the dentist,
I
where's the
know,
school,
right?
where's the all those things, and you're like, I just want to map out my room. So that's really awesome. What a good way to cope with it, because that certainly sounds a lot more fun than what we have to go through on the back
Right.
end.
No, I know.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it was cute because meanwhile I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna get a house?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So what did you do before you created the safe spaces Pride and Grit?
So I was like, I guess, kind of pre-military life, pre-husband. I was an instructional designer and a corporate trainer. So I used to work I actually worked for GlaxoSmithKline for like 10 years um, as a corporate trainer for them. And I developed training curriculums for corporations. So was very much kind of in that corporate arm of the world and enjoyed that,
Mm,
and was really, really fortunate because when we had our son, I was able to stop traveling, which I had been doing full time, and then stay home and just write curriculum. So I would just write the courses that other people would then go out and train.
mm,
And so I was really, really lucky because I got to keep that job, really all the way up until we went to Germany in 2015. I took a few little hiatuses here and there, but we married in '06, and then, for 9 years, I was able to continue to work part-time in this remote career that I kind of carved out,
mhm,
just because I had been doing it full time, and was, the folks I was working with were kind of gracious enough to let me shift it over and do it remotely, kind of back when remote wasn't as popular.
mhm.
Now that wouldn't seem so strange, but, back then it was a
Yeah,
little less the norm. That was back when people were saying remote work would never stick.
right.
Um, so, So when I was in Germany, I worked a little bit. And then when that contract ended, I was really enjoying just being in Europe, and, the role I was in and the unit we were in, I really just wanted to give my full attention to. And so I kind of didn't pick it back up. And that created a little bit of a void. I was listening to a podcast recently about identity and just, having your identity and how important that can be for navigating military life. And for me, I think that was a part of where Pride and Grit came from, is if it was, I really wanted something that was my own, and that, gave me the ability to tell these stories that I wanted to tell. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I just sort of jumped in, head first, because it felt important. And so then here we are.
That's great. No, I love that remote work. It's a new thing now, and I think it's genius, and it's so helpful for a lot of people, especially for male spouses who have to move around a lot. I mean, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, no, massively so. It is before our eyes, changing, the military spouse experience without question. I mean, it's transforming it in ways that just weren't available to, me 10 or 15 years ago.
Yes. So yeah, that's awesome. Was there any struggles going on that you didn't really talk about before we went to the discussion of thinking that you had to be perfect? Was there something that was because we can't always be perfect, but was there struggles that you didn't want to really talk about because you were afraid that you were going to be judged about it, or you just wanted to try to work on your own, or what can you tell us that? Yeah.
Well, so one of the big ones, which was a lot of really the impetus for starting Pride and Grit, was around my miscarriage story. So when in 2016, when we were newly to Germany, and I was, I just celebrated my 40th birthday, and then was like not magically pregnant. And it was such a shock, because our kids were, my youngest had just started kindergarten, and it was like, it was in that really kind of not important stage, all important, but there's like that point where both your kids are in school all day, and it's like, oh my gosh, life is totally transformed. And now there's time for me, and there's time for all these other things that I want to be doing. And that was the stage I was in. And then I was pregnant, and my husband was in really his most demanding job to date. And probably still what I'd consider one of the most demanding. And I was like, there's not room for this. Like, this can't be happening. It was this really weird experience of like shock and surprise and all of the things that come with an unplanned event like that. But it was also about just the fact that I couldn't fathom how to live the life we were living with that as a piece, right? I didn't understand it at the time. Like, how could we possibly do this right now? He's not going to be here. I'm going to have to do this on my own. It's going to be harder than I want right now, kind of thing. Mm. And so in terms of things that were hidden, I think for me, being honest about all those feelings was incredibly difficult because of the role I was in. Mm. And I was, an advisor to the unit, and felt like I needed to know things, and felt like I needed to, have it together. And I did not have it together, right? I had with guilt over the fact that I was pregnant, and I was that person that wasn't elated instantly. I was scared, and I was upset, and I was shocked. And I had all these friends who'd been through, infertility, and I thought, oh my gosh, they would all trade places with me in a second. What is wrong with me? Mm. And it felt horrible to feel that way. And then I made this shift, relatively quickly within a few weeks. The beauty of like German, care is that you do ultrasounds all the time.
Yes.
And so you get and so it was this beautiful thing where very quickly I got to evolve from being scared to being excited, because I got to see like the progression. I got to see what was happening in my own body. And so then we were excited, and then I was on board, and it was like, this is going to be awesome. And then I lost that pregnancy. And that's the first time I'd ever had a loss like that. And so it was a blow on multiple levels. And And I didn't know how to tell anyone about any of that. I hadn't told, hardly anyone. I think at that point, I'm not even sure I told anyone I was pregnant.
Mm.
And I was like 11 weeks. So I wasn't, super late into it. But a loss nonetheless. And I just didn't know how to tell people. And part of that was because I was I was not new to the unit, but I was maybe 5 months in.
Mm-hmm.
So, 5 months as an introvert is not, I need more time than that, right? That's not how long it's going to take me to make a bunch of people for my circle. It just takes me longer than that. And so I didn't necessarily feel like I could go to the circle I had developed, which there was one.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know. And I don't know what I thought they would do. In hindsight, it's one of those things where I look back and go, oh my gosh, what was wrong with me? Why in the world did I not trust these people around me? Because they're all women.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are mothers. They're all going to get it. I can see that now, but I couldn't see that then.
Right.
And so I hid all of that grieving process from the people around me that could have easily helped. And eventually, as I started to open up to some of those individuals, of course, they were lovely, and of course I went, oh man, I should have done this a long time ago. But to be honest, I was not even honest with my husband about what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
I was sort of playing the dutiful, if you will, military spouse role. And I wasn't. He was set to go off to training for a month. And I said, yep, you should go. I'm just fine. And I wasn't.
Right.
And he didn't know that I wasn't because he'd never been through this either. And so it was this really amazing learning experience for both of us to understand what that kind of loss and that kind of event in a family can look like. And that it's not linear. It's not easy. You think you're fine one day and you're not the next. And so having that support network really would have been valuable to me in those weeks when he was away, because then I made the choice to shoulder all of that on my own, an ocean away from the people that I truly count on when I need it. They were all stateside. The friends I'd had for decades, that I leaned on were still 6 hours away by phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, in terms of hiding, that's something I hope that, if anyone else is dealing with something where they feel like they have to hide that from others, they will consider whether that truly is necessary. Because I think certainly for me, looking back, the tribe would have come. Like, I have no doubt they would have rallied. And they would have been there and they would have been amazing. And frankly, it would have forged bonds with them that I didn't allow to happen because I kept myself closed off. And it was all because of this idea that I had to, I couldn't be the one falling apart because I had to be the one being strong. And I think that is really a dangerous place to put yourself, because life just doesn't always work that way,
Yeah. Well, you're right. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I am really sorry about your loss. Um, I had mine in Germany, but this is back in 2000, 2001. And like you, I thought that I had to be strong and I had to keep it in. I had to go back to work and we just don't talk about it and I'm good. And then years later, when I had my son, my daughter would, she was born first, and I had the miscarriage, and then my son. She would ask me, "Well, Mom, did you name the baby? Do you know what it was?" And all these questions, and I'm like, I really didn't want to think about it. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I just hurt too much, and if I just pushed it away and pretend like it didn't happen, which is terrible. I'm not. It's a terrible thing to feel, but that's just that's all I knew, because who was I
Yeah.
going to go talk to about it?
Right.
And so now, it's been 18 years, and I still get sad, like, man, I didn't really have time to grieve, because
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
continue
I told
going on.
this story on my site about kind of this really cathartic experience that happened a few weeks after. It was like early January, and I'd walked into one of my favorite little stores, and there was this shelf that had old Christmas stuff. They were all marked down.
Mhm.
And there was this little ornament hanging and it was a girl. And I had always like, at 11 weeks, I had no idea, but it was a girl. And it had, and she just had this kind of, she was just German looking, right? She had little kind of, I don't know. To me, she looked like a little German girl. I don't even know what that means, but on across her dress was the word hope, and she was an ornament. And I stood in this aisle, and people probably thought I was a crazy lady, because I'm standing in this aisle and I am like streaming tears, because I had in that moment, I felt like that was there for me, right? This little girl is here all by herself for me, and I'm going to take her home. And so I brought her home, and she's on our tree, and I put her on every year, and she gets 3 inches of bubble wrap to ensure nothing ever happens to her on one of our moves. But it was like the dates that when I opened up Christmas, I was like, I need to find her. Like, I need to make sure she's okay. But it was this weird thing that happens. Like you were saying, you feel like you have to just kind of push and push and push. And I did. And then all of a sudden, this moment came where I had to feel and I had to acknowledge that this was hard and that this was a loss. And that was a big part of me starting to tell, a couple of people. But honestly, there were people, until I put it on my site, that were around me at the time that never knew. Because then it's like, once you've missed that window, then it feels kind of weird to go like, hey, you remember 6 months ago when I was like, when I bailed on everything, this was why, like it just doesn't, it almost seems weird to make a big deal about it later. But I think everybody grieves differently, and everybody's going to handle it differently. And it's not about not grieving or handling a hardship in the way that you want to. Like, everybody should have the ability to handle it the way they want. I think what's important is to not feel like you have to handle it in a vacuum, because somehow the expectation is there's not room for you to fall apart. There is absolutely room for you to have a hardship and fall apart, right? Like, that's okay. That's part of what this community is really good at lifting people out of when people ask us to. But I just, I think a lot of it was, I had kind of bought into the role, if you will. And I felt like I was the person who needed to be strong. I was the person who needed to have the answers. And that meant I needed to shoulder this on my own. And now I know that is a way to do it. But I really hope someone else will choose a different path. Because I really feel like there are better paths than that. And we're better as a community than that. Like, it's just, it wasn't the community, it was me. And I kind of robbed them of that opportunity, right? And I robbed myself of the ability to be supported in a way that would have made it all a little easier.
Right.
So.
We didn't know. That was the only way we knew how to grieve, right?
Yeah. No. It's it's a weird experience. It's a personal experience. It's all of those things, but I think it translates into just, it translates into general hardships. It translates into smaller, shallower valleys. It's not just the deep valleys that are the hardest to ask for help. Sometimes there's shallow valleys that we won't ask for help in those times either. And I wish we would, because I think it would help all of us feel like we're all a little more human.
Yes. Well, and that's why we're here. I feel now is to tell everybody, look, we've been there too, and don't wait. It's okay. Bring it up, talk to somebody, and someone is there for you at all times, even when we don't think that there are.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Oh my gosh. So tell people where we can find you and your blog and your website and all the things.
So I am on Facebook and on Instagram, both at Pride and Grit, and is spelled out. And then I'm on Twitter, but not much. I'm technically on Twitter. I think I'm at Pride and G there. And then the website is just prideandgrit.com. So I would, obviously love anyone who feels like the story today, resonates with them. I'd love to hear from them. But just in general, if there's a story you want to tell about how you've gone through something and how you kind of came out the other side and what you learned. I think part of what I'm trying to do is help illuminate sort of, if this is your hardship, here's a path someone else took. What could you learn from that, and how could that help you? That's what I'm trying to do. So
That's perfect. Well, I appreciate everything you do and everything you have done. And I'm really proud of you because it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to take all of that and then create another safe space for other women to feel like they can share their own stories as well. And that's just not everybody can do that. So I think it's amazing.
I appreciate that.
So thank you.
You're doing some pretty awesome stuff yourself, lady.
No, I appreciate it, but I think, following such empowering women like yourself, that's what helps. It does, because we all get in that little dark hole. We don't feel like, what we're doing is making a difference. But then we see people like you, and it's like, you know what? That's awesome. Yep, I can survive too. So
No, we'll all be fine if we just lean on each other.
exactly. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for being on today, and I look forward to seeing everything else that you're going to be doing in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Truths We Hide podcast, created by A Wild Ride Called Life. To find out more about our mission, visit www.awildridecalledlife.com.